Good morning. We're joined this morning by Dr. Jamie Bennett, Deputy Director of Operational Security Group, and we're here to talk through the new Security and Rehabilitative Culture Sourcebook. So Jamie, my first question to you is, what is the purpose and the aim of this sourcebook?
Security and rehabilitation are most effective when they work together. When we have a secure prison where people feel safe, it gives them the headspace to make changes in their lives. And also the way we do security can really make a difference. Heavy-handed security that feels punitive can create resistance, can create challenges and create difficulty. It doesn't create the foundation for people to make a positive difference in their lives. But if we have security that is respectful, that's decent, it's often seen as much fairer by the people who are the subject of it, and it helps to create a more positive community.
And so who is this sourcebook for?
Primarily this is aimed at security leaders, so that's heads of security, security managers, regional and national advisors, subject matter experts. But in reality, I think anyone could pick up this sourcebook and get something from it and encourage them to think about their own practice.
So why now, and what do you hope that it will achieve?
Rehabilitative cultures has been gaining traction in recent years, and security practice really needs to engage with this. But as we talk now, we're in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. So a question might be asked, well, why in this context? But we have to be thinking about the future and how we move towards recovery. And this is an opportunity for us to think about how we practice security now and in the future, and to reshape that. The government has been talking about how we build back better across the nation. And this is one of the ways in which security can really engage with that idea of building back better.
How do you hope that this sourcebook will be used?
The sourcebook can be used by prisons, organisations, to try and think about their own practice. So how might they do their security committees differently? How might they structure and organise their work in a different way? But also it's important to think about the culture of the organisation. So how do we use training, development, supervision, communication in order to try and shape practice? But also individuals could pick up this sourcebook, read it, and think about themselves. Think about how they do their work day to day and how they might do it differently in the future.
Okay, and how does this sourcebook link to the Rehabilitative Leadership Handbook?
So rehabilitative leadership is about the skills that all leaders can develop in order to promote rehabilitative cultures. So the Rehabilitative Culture and Security Handbook is thinking about those skills specifically in a security context. So both the Rehabilitative Leadership Sourcebook and the Security and Rehabilitative Culture Sourcebook go absolutely hand in hand.
So what are some of the myths surrounding security and rehabilitative cultures working in parallel?
I remember one prison I worked in, and I'd heard, this person didn't say it to me, but I heard that they'd said it, that they said that security department shouldn't sit on rehabilitative culture committees because it was a conflict of interest. And this is just an absolute myth. Sometimes rehabilitative culture is seen as being soft, being indulgent, about being passive, but actually nothing could be further from the truth. True rehabilitative culture means setting boundaries, it means maintaining them fairly and creating a sense of safety. But also there are some myths around security. There's often a myth that security requires a punitive approach, sort of toughness, almost aggressiveness. But actually such an approach really undermines security. It creates resistance, it creates a sense of unfairness, it reduces cooperation and can reduce the amount of intelligence, for example, that we receive. So it actually undermines security. The best approaches are those that combine the best of rehabilitative cultures with the best of effective security practice, and working together they can be really powerful.
So Jamie, why are relationships important and what do they look like?
Relationships are absolutely vital to prisons. They make a real difference in terms of people feeling safe, people feeling that they're being treated decently, but also they make a huge difference in terms of security and control. Where there are good relationships, people are more likely to accept authority, to accept difficult decisions, and they're also more likely to share intelligence or information. And also, over the longer period of time, it can help people to move from criminal behaviours through to changing their lives, and so becoming more safe, not just in prisons but after release. What do good relationships look like? Well, good relationships can look many different ways. Not all people are the same, and people need to bring their own personality to how they construct great relationships. What we do know is that broadly you can have relationships that are overly heavy, so where people are too punitive, where they're aggressive or too detached from people, but also where people are too indulgent, where they find difficulty saying no, where they try to do too much for people. That can be equally problematic. So the best relationships are those that are able to provide care within boundaries and within an effective framework. And it takes a real art to be able to establish those relationships, but great prison officers do that by building up their craft over a period of time.
And how can security leaders nurture the right relationships?
There's a huge amount that security leaders can do to nurture good relationships in a prison. Fundamentally, I think that security leaders need to make sure that they're giving a message about what good relationships look like, which is consistent with other leaders throughout the prison. I think it always creates problems if you've got a security department saying one thing and others saying something completely different. So I think security and security leaders play a really important role in communicating and setting out expectations of what good relationships are. They can play a really important role in induction, training, consistent communication about those relationships. They can play a really effective role in giving people the opportunity to discuss effective relationships and to reflect upon their own practice. So I think that security leaders play that really valuable role in developing others, but also people won't just listen to what leaders say, they'll look at what they do. So security leaders will be role models for the right kind of relationships and how they act, how they interact with colleagues and with the people in prison will really set an example that others will follow.
Why is procedural justice important in supporting the integration of security and a rehabilitative culture?
Procedural justice has 4 elements. The first is voice, that the person who's the subject of a decision or authority needs to be able to express their view and be able to tell their side of the story. The second is respect. So the person who's the subject of that power needs to feel that their rights are being respected and that as an individual they're being respected by the person who's exercising authority. The third is neutrality. So it's important that the person making the decision creates the impression that they haven't prejudged the issue, so that they actually listen to the issues and consider it before deciding what they're going to do. And the fourth element is trustworthy motives. So people who are the subjects of power will really look for the people who are making the decisions to be acting in everyone's best interests. So if those 4 elements are present, it really does make a huge difference. What essentially it does is means that the people who are the subject of decisions, even if they're difficult decisions for them, even if they're going against them. So if you're giving someone bad news, or if you're making a decision like carrying out a search or a drug test, or any other manner of security decisions that have to be taken on a day-to-day basis, if you can do them in a procedurally just way, then the people who are subject of them see them as fair, and so they're less likely to resist them. So if we can act in a way that's procedurally just, first of all, it makes our job easier because we're less likely to get people resisting it. But secondly, what it does is that over time it builds up respect, trust and fairness, so it contributes to a more positive sense of community, which can really help everyone be much more safe.
What has diversity and inclusion got to do with security and rehabilitative culture?
Black, Asian and minority ethnic people are subject to much higher levels of policing, both in the community and in prisons. So if you think, for example, about the controversies that have been in the community about stop and search, being disproportionately used towards people from particular minority ethnic groups, then it's also true that security procedures, whether that's searching, use of force, drug testing, etc., again, there are arguments there that they are used disproportionately against those particular people. So it can be a real driver of inequality and unfairness. So recognising that and taking action is absolutely central to good security.
So what can we all do to promote and uphold diversity and inclusion?
Everyone has a role in promoting diversity and inclusion. Within security, the first thing to think about is respectful practice. So when we think about, for example, searching, we might think about religious and cultural implications of that. So we might need to adapt some of our practices to account for different religious and cultural practices. Or we might need to think about, for example, where people have health problems or disabilities, or in fact where people are transgender, then how do we conduct our searching and other security practices in ways that are respectful to people from a diverse range of backgrounds and experiences? The second area that we should think about is monitoring the impact of our work. So I talked earlier on about disproportionality in security practices such as searching, drug testing and the use of force. So security committees will have a really critical role in monitoring that, identifying any disproportionality and taking action where that exists. The third area that we can all think about is how we develop ourselves and improve our cultural competence and our understanding of diversity issues. So this might start with, for example, unconscious bias training, but also engaging with many other opportunities to build our understanding of the whole range of different experiences that people have. The fourth area that we can think about is how we diversify our teams. So the best security departments are those which reflect the broader staff group, whether that's in terms of race and ethnicity, or in terms of gender, or any other protected characteristic. A good security team will be one which does reflect the whole of the staff group. And then the final issue we should think about is how we listen to engage with the people who are subjected to security, so people in prison, prisoners. How do we understand what it feels like to be on the receiving end of security practice? So security departments have got a really critical role in engaging with those people, listening to their experiences and building up understanding. In that way, not only can we reduce the risk that there is of inequality and unfairness, but security departments can actually play a really critical role in building a stronger and more positive community.
What is being trauma informed and trauma responsive, and why is that important within HMPPS?
A high proportion of people in prison have experienced trauma. Often this can be violent or sexual abuse. So understanding this and adapting our practices to reflect it means that we can provide a much better service to those people, because we have to understand that the impact of trauma can be lifelong and can particularly be triggered by stressful situations.
So how can we support this in how we work?
We can all build in trauma-informed practice to our work, and sometimes this is just in fairly small ways, but can really make a significant difference. So first of all, thinking about how we interact with people, which can often be in difficult situations. So for example, carrying out a targeted search, carrying out a drug test, carrying out other kind of security practices. And the first thing is to build a sense of safety and trust, just by explaining what's happening, why it's happening, and what to expect throughout the process. This can make a really significant difference to someone who's nervous about that, and perhaps has problems with trust, and perhaps has anxiety about their experiences in the past. Beyond that, we can think about trying to build in choices, so that people understand that they can decide within bounds about what they do. So people have choice, for example, about whether they engage in criminal activity or not. So help people to understand that they have choices in their lives, can help them to sort of think about how they might act differently in the future as well, and that they're not powerless. And collaborating with people. So perhaps when carrying out those activities, or when people are talking about being challenged about some of the difficult criminal activities that they might have been involved in prisons, then collaborating with them, helping them to understand how they might access services that will help them, pointing them in the direction of where they might get support, setting up an appointment for them with someone who might be able to help and support them. So not just leaving them, but actually trying to build a sense of collaboration. And ultimately, this all contributes towards empowerment, where people feel in control of their own lives so that they can make more positive choices. Now, all of that might sound like it takes a huge amount of time. Actually, all it takes is just using that time when you've got a search, or when you're doing a drugs test, or when you're doing other activities, just using that time positively to think about how you might create that sense of trust, about how you might use some of that opportunity to help people think about their futures. Sometimes just small things can make a big difference, and sometimes an investment of a small amount of time can make a huge difference in someone's life.
So Jamie, what would be your key takeaway messages?
Well, my first message is to read the Sourcebook and think about how you can use this in your work to try and both change your own practice and also influence that of others. The message that this Sourcebook gives is that security and rehabilitative culture, properly integrated and working together, can be a really powerful source for good. Security can create the space that people need to make a positive change in their lives. But security can be done well, or it can be done poorly. So it can be a constructive or a destructive force. The way we do security really makes a difference. And if we do security well, in a way that integrates rehabilitative cultures, it will be respected by the people who are subject to it, and it will help to create a sense of fairness and a more positive community for everyone.
Thank you very much, Jamie, for answering those questions. We really appreciate your time today and talking us through this fantastic Sourcebook.